Okay, so we are at part 2, chapter 3, the French defense of Dorothy Dunnett's Game of Kings. So we start with page 212. This is back at, I do not know why people are visiting Andrew Hunter's mother. I'm sorry, but why did Sibylla just want to go visit her? She has like, what? She's awful. There's something going on with her, because why is she here? I mean, she could just be here for comic relief or just here to poke fun at Mariotta. But why are we visiting her house? What has possessed Sibylla to go and see her? Am I missing something? So she says here on page, this is the awful mother, sorry. And maybe she's not that awful. On page 213, none of the Crawfords would make more than a hen sparrow. And so she's found out that Mariotta's pregnant, and Mariotta is now getting made fun of because I think Mariotta must be small. But Catherine is specifically saying that none of the Crawfords would make more than a hen sparrow, saying, are the Crawfords small in general? My understanding was that they were at least average, and that Richard is quite good on the battlefield. I mean, I think he's quite the man. I mean, he's already shown that he's quite good athletically, saving Agnes from the river, and his shooting prowess that we never got to see because Lymond shot the bird, but everyone was expecting him to get it. I guess, I mean, it's fine. It's just, maybe this is more saying that Catherine really values manliness, and that's why she's giving her own other son, Andrew, such a hard time, because he isn't the man that her eldest son has been or once was. I am actually quite excited though to see, because I think they make a comment on when is Andrew going to marry. Who will he marry? Yeah, so Mariotta, it describes him, this is page 214, fine hands and good carriage. No one could say he's uncomely. No one listening to the warmth of his voice could find him displeasing. So what is the issue here with Andrew Hunter? Of everyone introduced so far, he seems like the most sane and marriageable. Obviously from the perspective of a 21st century woman, that might be, might come across as different if he isn't as rich as other men. I quite like Andrew. And that's even better when Mariotta wants to go and talk to him, and he's really quick about it, and he's quite concerned about the idea of being alone with a married woman as a single man. And he tries to get her out as quick as possible and encourages Mariotta to tell Richard about the jewellery, which Mariotta has confided in him about. And like, all of this is just like really lovely to see. He's just being honest and trying to stick up for his bro, but also just trying to do the right thing. And I agree when Mariotta says about Andrew, like, poor Dandy, what a lovely guy. Dorothy Dunnett, don't you kill off Andrew Hunter, don't you do it. Oh my gosh, Mariotta talking about, this is top of page 215, talking about Lymond. I'm so fascinated at how many ways that Dorothy Dunnett can tell her readers that Lymond is an attractive gentleman without specifically using words like he's attractive or he's good looking. We've got so many unusual but intriguing descriptions of Lymond, which I have been making a very close list of as I've been reading. And this description of Lymond as he isn't unattractive, Dandy, is the closest we are going to get to he is attractive. But Dunnett is so much better at describing the emotional reactions of characters who are around Lymond to make the description of Lymond rather than specifically telling us outright. And that's part of the mystery of Lymond, is just never really giving solid descriptions. There's just, aside from his eyes and his hair colour and his hands, we really don't get any other description of his vibe except for all of these very unusual intriguing descriptions. To hear Mariotta speak of her husband's brother as he isn't unattractive, I feel is quite an alarming thing. I don't know what's going through Andrew's head at this point. Is he a schemer and we're just getting this really nice persona? I don't know. And just Mariotta keeps falling into this Lymond trap. And I just want to say, don't play with the fire. Look behind you. You have an ocean behind you. Even if the ocean is a little bit cold, don't walk into the fire. Page 215, the best line of this chapter goes to Christian. We always get Christian doing great lines. Christian knew it was there. This is about the letter that, the next letter that Jack Maxwell has sent, that Lymond has sent in the name of Jack Maxwell. Passing and repassing, she was aware of it. It sat among her innocent and mundane thoughts like a tiger among peahens. That's a brilliant line. We all have these dark thoughts among peahens. We can relate to that. And Christian is blind, so she can't even see the letter sitting there. She's just passing by it back and forth, but she can't see it. She just knows it's somewhere there. That's even worse. And then Lymond cuts her off. And kind of passive-aggressive? Or is he just... I mean, this is all happening after Lymond has had this conversation with Will Scott about... And Will has been annoyed at him for using Christian, and then he does this. How much of this is Lymond closing the communication line because of what Will said? Are we actually getting Will influencing Lymond? If so, that is adorable and I love it. Or is this just Lymond cutting the line of communication because there's no point in continuing it? Maybe he genuinely knew that he was putting Christian in harm's way, but it wasn't until Will yelled at him about it that it made it come up, and now he's stopping the communication. It's just so nice to see how mature that Christian is. On the top of page 216, she knows that this thing with Lymond and her has ended, and then she says, but she has to admit, whatever its purpose, the dignities of happiness had transformed Lady Ares. So she just sort of puts it behind her and takes it in her stride, which is totally different to what we literally saw the page before with Marietta, who is a married woman to a very rich man, pregnant with his child, is getting admired by other men and cannot help but think about them, and cannot help but focus on the negatives. And here we have Christian literally, she likes Lymond and would probably like to continue seeing him. Well, she totally knows it's Lymond, but anyway. Well, her mysterious person who she isn't supposed to know who is Lymond, but she immediately thinks about a positive, which is how much joy this has brought to Agnes. And on a side note, I don't know what time frame that the Lymond Chronicles is going to cover. I wonder if it is going to be a year. Well, we're already like months in here, like a few months have passed already in this book, but I wonder if the series is like 5 to 10 years, and if so, I'm very excited to see Agnes grow up and just see how she changes, and if she does develop as a character. It would be really nice to see Agnes when she's a bit older, reflecting back on these letters, acknowledging that she was so naive and knowing that they were probably not actually written by Jack Maxwell, but then still loving Jack and just staying loyal to him. That would be really beautiful. But yeah, I think what happened is that Lymond, through Will Scott's eyes, has been able to glimpse a little bit of the monster that he is. And Will Scott is almost like a conscience or a way of controlling himself, because Will is going to point out all of his flaws and Lymond is trusting Will to point out all of his flaws. I don't think Lymond has ever really not allowed Will to speak his mind. And so I wonder how much Lymond keeps Will around for his own personal self-flagellation. Also, why was Christian not an eligible bachelorette for Richard? What is Richard's relationship like with Christian? Do they know each other? I mean, they can't. They can't know each other, because if Richard knows Christian, that means Lymond would know Christian, and then they would know each other. And Lymond literally did not recognize Christian, that we know of, when he woke up with his memory loss. So they don't know each other. Okay. Though he has been away for a long time, I get that. Now, Richard goes to Perth, and this is a great moment because I live in Perth, except not Perth, Scotland, Perth, Australia. Page 218, Richard arrives in Perth to try to find the person who made these gloves. And everything's quiet and desolate, and it's Christmas Eve and no one's doing anything, no shops are open. He just goes around like banging on every door, waking up the whole neighborhood. And that is how you lord, ladies and gentlemen. That is what you do when you are a baron. You do not care about disturbing anyone, for you are the lord. Oh my god. Oh my goodness. Richard. I mean, if Richard came banging on my door here in Perth on Christmas Eve, I would definitely let him in. Beating methodically on every door. Richard is a methodical type of person. And then bottom of page 218, the gentleman, Jamie War, who opens the door and weighs him up with a rheumatic eye, setting the obvious urgency of his quest against the cut of his lordship's clothes. Richard is he's so rich. So I can't imagine what Richard is wearing. Maybe he's wearing like a really beautiful like velvet tunic, maybe dark blue or dark green or something like that. And like a sword belt, and I mean, would he have riding clothes on? He would have riding clothes on. The fact that back in the day you could really distinguish a person's wealth based on the clothes, how fine their clothes were, is wild. We could never do that now. You couldn't tell anyone's wealth from what they're wearing. But yeah, Richard with a beautiful like dark green velvet tunic to match his dark hair and his grey eyes, I think would look very nice. And then on page 220, even the woman who was making some sort of soup and offered it to Lord Coulter a spoonful before the implications of his dress struck her, and then she blushed. People like really... He's just like ruling everyone based on what clothes he is wearing. Like no one asks his name. He just assumes people to like fall over backwards. Look at my clothes. It's so weird. Oh my gosh. Glover's Yard. Okay. Richard is very cute in this entire scene. Anyway, gets the guy to come back to find out who bought the gloves. And we get this description of Lymond. Can you imagine Lymond just waltzing in to buy this glove, and he's probably wearing pretty scruffy clothes. He probably looks pretty scruffy, but he has just enough niceness about him that people think he maybe has the money to buy it. But then as soon as he opens his mouth, the words that would come out would mean that everyone would think he is a highly educated wanker and assume he is rich. And the best description of Lymond so far, I don't care, I've not read a better one before, is on page 224. In comes this fellow ordering gloves as fussy as a flea in a bathtub over the pattern. And that describes Lymond right there. The attention to detail about the most ridiculous things, the micromanagement over things that don't seem to have importance. This just sums him up. Yellow hair and an awful tongue in his head. And it's really funny because at the bottom of page 224, top of 225, the Jamie or Mr. War that actually admits that he got swindled by Lymond, and he remembers the anger. He's like, yeah, I knew he was telling a lie, but he just had such a manner on him. And Richard is like, yep. Richard knows. Say no more. It's very, very cute. And the fact that Lymond has set Richard up to pay for these gloves is perfect, absolutely perfect. And Richard knows that I love the line here, whatever bitter self-mockery lay behind the impassive face, Lord Coulter showed none of it. This is the same as what we saw previously when I think it was Andrew Hunter was looking at Richard, and behind the cold exterior he could see fire and passion. This is the exact same description, and I just love how Dunnett is so specifically accurate and consistent with her descriptions of each character and how they're characterized, even though she does it in a variety of different ways. It's the consistency is brilliant. And the most heartwarming thing about Richard is that he kind of shrugs it all off and then goes and eats ham and gets drunk. And the most telling part about this, and this is what I think is this makes me really sad about Richard, is we've got here on page 225 is that, and this is the house that he went to, the people that he was celebrating Christmas Eve with, said, "He was damned if the fellow wasn't good value at a party and could hold his liquor like a fisherman." This is regarding Richard. A statement that Mariota and perhaps even the Dowager would have been astonished to hear. So we see that Richard is fun at a party. He like speaks well and he is really good at holding his liquor. And Mariota doesn't see that or understand that about Richard, that he is quite, nice to be around at a party. And even his mother might have been astonished about that fact. And all I could think of here is that Richard is probably quite charismatic in many ways, but he's just always been compared to Lymond. And when Lymond, with his 10 out of 10, 11 out of 10 charisma comes along, everything about Richard would have just seemed bland. And it's just really sad that Richard kind of wears that. So page 226, 227, when Sibylla goes to Patty Liddell's, she finds out that Patty Liddell is getting some gold, which is not the yellow gold, but white gold, which is similar to what Mariota is receiving. So that makes me think Sibylla has noticed the jewels that Mariota is wearing and is putting them together and thinking they must come from Patty Liddell and then from Lymond, I assume. Anyway, she basically says stay away from Mariota. She does warn Patty Liddell to just steer clear of her daughter-in-law. I don't quite entirely understand why there was a warning there. Sibylla is protecting Patty Liddell because because he's dodging taxes by obviously getting gold from questionable sources and not paying the 10% tax required or something like that. But Sibylla is choosing not to hand him, not to tell the authorities, and then making it clear to him that because she's not telling the authorities, Patty Liddell needs to do what she says. And it's Christmas, and it's so nice. I've never had Christmas in a winter time, but I always adore how it is described, with the French that come over with all their money and their courtesans, and the court dance that played games and watched masks and cardboard cumuli, and the description of the French dancing like well-mannered clowns. It's just so perfect. It's such a French Scottish Christmas. And our first actual romance scene that was beautiful between Agnes and John Maxwell on page 228. Jack Maxwell we should say. Wow, he just hands around her waist and swung her easily to the broad parapet, and then gave her a rose and asked her, "Are you disappointed?" And she's like, "No, you're as handsome as your letters." What a slap in the face. Because not that John would have actually cared, but John would be thinking either the letters that Lymond wrote were really good and that's a compliment, or they're really bad and that's an insult. But he knows that they would have been written really well because she's into him, so but I bet you he was thinking, good job, Lymond, good job. That was so easy. Like, he just waltzed in, put on a persona, and he was the handsome prince saving Agnes. It's such a beautiful scene that he's just coming and romancing her, and it plays with your heart a bit because you know that John Maxwell is kind of just playing along and you feel for Agnes. But at the same time, I am thinking, well, he was very much a neutral character when we met him. He seemed very level-headed and just sort of, I'll go with what works. maybe he would actually be such a great husband because of that. Richard coming back and that interaction with Mariota was painful to read. They just have these typical domestics, Richard and Mariota, where basically each person is communicating to the other in a style that the other person would never understand. So they are just talking past each other. And it's really frustrating. It's done so cleverly, but it's really frustrating to read. Page 229. Richard rose to welcome her with an expression the Dowager would have recognised as discomfort and guilt, but the net result is that Mariota looked angry and Richard looked wooden. Sad. Once again, Richard proves that he's trying his best just to be a good friend, because Janet Buccleuch is trying to tell Richard about the meeting between Will Scott and Wat Scott upcoming, and Richard's like, don't tell me, I'm already in his bad books, I don't want to know. But then of course she says, and Richard is like, ooh, ooh, ooh. But he made the effort to try to not be on Buccleuch's bad side. That's appreciated, Richard. But Janet Buccleuch, like, why is she so obsessed with helping, with getting Will back? I've asked this question before, and now all I can think of is that she is just a loyal wife trying to get the best for Wat, and she thinks that if Wat tries to get him and Lymond back, it would be better than... She thinks she's helping him? I think that she is just a good wife. And she's going about it in her own way. Okay, so page 233, we get the introduction of a new character, Meg Douglas, or Margaret Douglas. And she's an important character because she has this, like, an opening introduction to herself, including how she looks, and it's all very formal and important, and she seems to waltz into this war meeting and wrap all of the men around her little finger, and they kind of not talk down to her, but they say bad things about the Douglases in front of her, and she's just like barking back at them. She's not affected by anything. She's holding her own. I quite like that. Then, finally, we get to some Lymond action. Lymond and meeting John Maxwell again. This is page 235. And we get this description of John Maxwell from Will's POV. That was basically, Scott saw that Maxwell was now handling the other man carefully. So Scott is observing how other people handle Lymond, and I think Scott realizes that John Maxwell is quite smart, because John Maxwell also has had I think he's quite intelligent, he can read Lymond, and I feel like John Maxwell is a bit of a chameleon, like he sort of just like morphs into what he needs to be. He seems quite harmless, maybe a bit of a people pleaser, like he just sort of tests water, but when it doesn't work he just steps back and then tries another technique. So I think John Maxwell is quite the chameleon. But a harmless chameleon is what we'll say. John Harmless Chameleon Maxwell. Apparently, Maxwell made reference to the conduct of December's cattle raid, but did not repeat the mistake. So Lymond must have just glared at him when that happened, and John would have been like, okay, chap, moving on. And, oh my gosh, two amusing things about the very end of this chapter. The first one was Lymond's reaction to Margaret Douglas, who is a niece by marriage, and Will looking at Lymond and seeing Lymond's face and voice were the first weapons, and he used them consciously and with the same control that in his brother kept expression away. Jeez. Both Richard and Lymond are so good at controlling their facial expressions, which they got from Sibylla, but Richard just keeps his as like a deadpan, whereas Lymond actually just uses whatever, or like changes it up. As that is a brilliant line. He used them consciously with the same control that in his brother kept expression away. Brilliant. It's just such a good dichotomy to compare the two. They have the same characteristic, but its phenotype, what we see, how it presents, comes up as totally different. So definitely Lymond and Margaret were lovers, 100%. There was some serious sexual tension and political tension between these two. I want the prequel, damn it. I want the prequel. They're like lovers to enemies. That's what they are. They could have been enemies to lovers to enemies again. To lovers again? We'll see. I don't know. I don't think we're going to get sex scenes in this book. I've resigned myself. So that was the first amusing thing, is that Lymond is visibly changing himself on the outside when Margaret Douglas's name came up. And the second thing is that, that was funny, is that on the way out, John Maxwell is like, you're good at Latin, but your French could use some work. It's so good. Yeah, you tell him, John Maxwell. Lymond is not brilliant at everything. He needs his ego taken down a peg. You can keep saying that. That is so brilliant. I think John and Lymond would be good friends. And then he smiled as he rode away after saying that. Oh my gosh. And Lymond is super happy about Margaret being available to steal because, and oh, his line about her, my brilliant devil, my imitation queen, my past, my future, my hope of heaven and my knowledge of hell. Margaret, Countess of Lennox. Oh my gosh. My knowledge of hell and my hope of heaven. Okay, if they were lovers before or like really close, I genuinely think that Lymond actually really liked Margaret. And as we've seen already, Margaret is someone not to be messed with. She is headstrong, and we know that Lymond likes headstrong women because he likes Christian, and Margaret is a league above Christian, I would say. Well, she's more powerful to start with. She's married to powerful people, is the daughter of powerful people, is the niece of King Henry VIII. So Lymond likes powerful women. He used to like Margaret. Margaret was his knowledge of hell, and now they are enemies, and I am so excited. Yay! And that is the end of the chapter at 237, and we're up to part 3, the play for Samuel Harvey. I'll see you next time.